Hello. Welcome back to the Love People Use Things podcast. This is the show that's all about pornography and how pornography can have negative impacts on us as individuals, as couples, and as a society as a whole. My name is Noah Church, and this is my second episode as a co-host of the Love People Use Things podcast. I'm excited to be back, and I have something special for you today. Our friend Matt Frad suggested to me that our listeners here could benefit a lot from hearing my own story, my own history with pornography, how I grew up in the age of the internet, was the first generation to do so, and how pornography was a part of my life from a young age up until adulthood, when I realized how harmful it had been to my life and my health in relationships and sexuality in my emotional realm, and how I finally left that all behind and recovered, how my life changed after that, and how I came to be where I am today, sharing my story and the stories of others, sharing this valuable information about how pornography can harm us, and helping others to recover from those problems when they find out that indeed pornography is something that is incompatible with a happy life for them. So as a warning, I am going to be sharing a lot of details about my own history with pornography and sex. Inherently, this story might contain content that is uncomfortable or inappropriate for certain listeners. I'm going to try not to be overly detailed or graphic, anything like that, but the nature of the story and getting at the truth of the story requires that I talk about some uncomfortable topics today. So keep that in mind if there are any sensitive listeners out there. And moving forward, telling the story, I admit I haven't rehearsed this. I haven't scripted it out, anything like that. And I'm doing that for a reason, actually. It's because I haven't shared my own story, really, in about 3.5 years. I think the last time I sincerely gave it an effort was in late 2014. Now, earlier that year is when I first wrote out my story of my history with pornography and sex up until that point, and I shared it anonymously online on a forum of other people recovering from porn-induced problems. And the support that I got there and the feedback that reading my story was really helpful for people, that they saw their own lives echoed in my words, that was inspiring for me. And I thought that, maybe all this pain that I had gone through could do others some good. So I kept writing, and I ended up publishing my book, Whack, Addicted to Internet Porn. And this book contained not only my own history and my own chronicle of how I recovered from that porn addiction that I suffered with and the porn-induced sexual dysfunction that I had suffered with for years at that point, but also the stories of others, an examination of the science and the neurology behind pornography addiction, and a complete guide to recovery for those who wanted to walk the same path and leave porn behind. After that, I started telling my story in bits and pieces online on YouTube. I made YouTube videos, and I still do. And in late 2014, I was invited to tell my story at a live storytelling event called the Mystery Box Show, which features storytellers who tell stories from their own lives, all centered around sex and sexuality. I was coached and worked with the producer of that show to craft my story in a way that would be most effective and fit within the time constraints. I think it was supposed to be no longer than 12 to 15 minutes. Mine ended up being about 18 or 19 minutes, and that was tough to pack it all in there. And I ended up having to cut out a lot of details that I thought were fairly important. So this story that I tell today is going to be different. I'm going to run off into tangents. I might wander a bit. I hope you'll forgive me. Not everything will be tied up in a neat little bow, because even if that makes for a more effective and incisive story, life is not a story, and life isn't always neat. So I'm just going to be trying to get at the truth here. And I'm not sure where that's going to take me. But I invite you to sit and listen and walk with me through this history of myself and my relationship with pornography, with women, with sex. Where do we start? Well, let's start way back in the beginning, as far as I can remember. When I was a kid, I always remember having an intense interest in women and girls and in sex. As far back as I can remember, 3 years old probably, I remember fantasizing about women in my life, about women I'd seen on TV, and I remember masturbating, especially before going to sleep at night. So I was always a young kid who had an innate sex drive, and I wasn't one of those who didn't develop an interest in the opposite sex until puberty, which a lot of people have that experience, but it wasn't my experience. I remember when I was 5 years old, probably 4 to 5 to 6, I had this neighbor girl, and we would sneak out into the forest and kiss each other, and or under the porch or in the closet, that sort of thing. And at the ripe, mature age of 5 or 6 years old, I remembered thinking that, we've been together for a while, and I feel old enough and mature enough to have sex for the first time. So I asked her if she would like to have sex at 5 years old. And that was, as far back as I can remember, I'd always had that as a central desire in my life, that was something that I wanted, was physical intimacy with women. And it didn't happen that time. She laughed, and she laughed hysterically for a few minutes, and we didn't talk about it again. I don't know if she laughed because she was uncomfortable or what exactly her motivation for laughing like that was, but we did not have sex. And my interest in sex and masturbating and fantasy and all of that didn't become a real problem for me, didn't start to impede my life in any way until I found internet pornography. And at age 9, I had a bright idea. At that point, for the last couple of years at least, we'd had a computer in the home with internet access. And this was dial-up. For those of you old enough to remember, dial-up means you actually have to occupy the phone line when you want to use the internet and activate that connection only when you are using it. It's very slow. Everything loads over the course of minutes, as I remember, but you are able to search for images, and Google was around at the time. So I knew Google had images of lots of different things, and I wanted to see images of pretty ladies. So Google might have images of pretty ladies, I reasoned. Indeed, Google did have those images and much, much more than I bargained for. And from that first search, I was hooked. And whenever I could find time to be alone with the computer, I was searching for those kinds of things. At first, it was just erotic images of women alone. And then it escalated to images of sex between women, mostly, because I wasn't interested in seeing a man naked. But then escalated to heterosexual contact, images of that, and erotic stories on websites, and eventually downloading videos through peer-to-peer software. This is software that allows users to share files across the internet with other users. At that time, when you were searching for pornography videos on peer-to-peer software, you might see a title, and that title might or might not be accurate. You never really knew what you were going to get, and you'd have to leave your internet connection enabled overnight to download anything. So I was watching videos and being exposed to content that was sometimes borderline illegal, or at least a couple of instances that I can remember, absolutely illegal. And that was at the age of 10 or 11 that I was being exposed to these things. And when I would first see content that was outside of what I was interested in, that was using people in ways or abusing people in ways that I wasn't comfortable with, I was disgusted, I was repulsed. That didn't align with my morality. I didn't want anyone to be hurt. I wanted everyone to enjoy themselves. And I got angry when I would see those things. But by the time I was probably 13 or 14, we had moved. I had a computer in my own room. We had a broadband internet connection, and I was getting access more frequently to pornographic content. And as I was using this on almost a daily basis, probably, sometimes for a couple of hours in a day, I started to become more interested in seeing those things that at first had disgusted and repulsed me. The old images that I started with that had excited me so much didn't really excite me anymore. I was desensitized to them, and I seemed to need more extreme content, more fringe content to become aroused or to be as interested or enjoy it as much as I used to. And my repulsion or moral disgust didn't go away, but I just rationalized to myself that it wasn't real, it was just fantasy, and it was harmless in that way. So I escalated to content that at first made me feel disgusted or dirty. But at that point, I started to need that sort of content in order to be aroused. At the time, I don't really think I thought it was a problem. I wasn't raised in a household where I had any sort of religious upbringing. I was never told that masturbation was immoral, and I was told nothing at all about pornography. I think my parents at the time, they didn't really understand what was out there on the internet or what their child had access to. And their own experience, or at least my father's experience with pornography, was probably only in magazines or perhaps videos, but they certainly didn't understand what was available on the internet and how that could impact a child growing up in that environment. So I didn't think that it was a problem that I was using pornography or that I was masturbating. I had no outside incentive telling me that it shouldn't be something I should engage in. I had no forethought that it might impact negatively my future relationships or my ability to connect romantically on a healthy level with another person. I thought that it was fairly normal, that most other guys must be doing this as well. It wasn't something at the time that I discussed with my peers, but I heard people joking about it, so I thought that it was a normal thing to do and that it wouldn't have any negative impact on me in the long run. I never even considered that it could. At the time, however, I wasn't pursuing real relationships. I wasn't pursuing a real girlfriend. I was shy. I never let pornography get in the way of completing my schoolwork or being a good student, but it did sap my motivation to put myself out there, make friends, actually meet girls, and start forming relationships in the real world. All that was sort of scary for me, and I wasn't very confident about myself socially. So instead, I found solace in pornography, and that became a way to solve my loneliness. And what I actually really wanted was connection, both emotionally and physically, with someone real that I really cared about. Pornography did not supply that, but when I was using it, it felt like that need was being met. Afterwards, I would always feel sort of empty, not really satisfied, sad that I was engaging in this solo sex rather than actually connecting with someone in the real world. I was lonely, and it was never satisfying. I never went to bed after using pornography happy that I had done it or glowing with pride or anything like that. It was just a way to fill a hole that I felt inside of myself, but that hole was never filled with pornography. It was just covered up temporarily while I was using, and then became deeper and deeper over time as I wasn't really focusing on meeting my actual needs. Late in high school, I started to come out of my shell and get less shy, make a lot more friends, and I found myself in a relationship with someone I really cared about. I thought she was beautiful, and we had a great time together. We were very attracted to each other. And eventually, we decided that we loved each other and we were ready to have sex. At this time, we'd already been going out for probably 3 months, and we had made out and been close physically with each other quite a bit. I was very attracted to her, but I noticed when we would be together kissing that I didn't really have a physical response. I didn't notice myself getting erect, and I wondered, what's up with that? Shouldn't something be happening down there? But I figured, well, we're not really naked yet. We're not really ready to have sex, so maybe that's it. And I'm sure that once we're together, naked, and ready to do that and take that step, that everything will work just fine. But it didn't. And the first time that we tried to have sex, I just didn't really have a physical reaction. And I was feeling detached and numb and not really in the situation, not really lost in just enjoying myself and being with her. Instead, I felt like I was floating above myself, and everything felt sort of weird and alien and didn't feel natural at all. I didn't really know what was going on. I told her I didn't think I was ready to have sex quite yet, and I was too confused and ashamed to talk about it more with her because I was ready to have sex, I felt like, emotionally, and it was something that I had been looking forward to my entire life, something that I'd always imagined would be just incredible and that would make me, excited and happy and satisfied. But at that moment, I just wasn't feeling it physically. And it felt like there was this schism between my attraction on a rational level for my girlfriend and this complete lack of arousal physically during that situation. I remember driving home just really confused, and I think the first thing I did when I got home was a search online for answers. I mean, that's what people of my generation did when we had deeply personal problems that we needed answers to. We didn't ask our parents or teachers. We would go online and search for the answers there. So I think I searched something like young man, erection problems, something like this. And everything I found told me that if it wasn't some physical problem, if I didn't have disease or disorder, if I was able to get erect by myself while masturbating or at night, then it must be psychological. It must be that I was simply anxious about it being my first time, and that anxiety and stress was getting in the way of actually becoming aroused. I thought that was a reasonable explanation, so I figured all I need is more time and more practice to build comfort and become more relaxed and for that to feel more natural. I had been having orgasms all my life by myself after all, and it might take a little while to get used to having that sexual contact with somebody else. Of course, after doing these searches, I also tested myself with pornography, and sure enough, I was able to get erect just fine. And so I figured, yeah, this must be right. I have no physical problems. It's just I got to build comfort and become more used to being physically intimate with another person. But over the following months, no matter how many times we tried, it didn't seem to get any better. I, at times, would fantasize about pornography that I had seen while I was with my girlfriend, just to see if that would help me become aroused enough and erect enough to have sex. But it might work for a little bit, but never long enough or well enough to actually make that connection and actually have a good experience with her. And I felt bad about doing that anyway. Why shouldn't I be aroused by just her? I mean, I thought she was beautiful, and if she was off in her head fantasizing about other men while we were together, that wouldn't feel good for me, so I didn't feel good about doing that to her, but I was desperate at the time, and I didn't know what was going on. I remember driving home after, failing for who knows how many times, and just pounding my fist on the steering wheel and screaming curses. I was just so confused and felt broken and ashamed. I didn't know who to ask for help or who to go to for guidance. I thought that I was alone in this and that I was broken somehow and didn't understand why. I thought at times that it might be that I just masturbated too much and I would have more success if I didn't look at porn or didn't masturbate for a week or two, but that didn't help either. And I figured that if a week or two off of porn and masturbation couldn't fix it, then that must not be the problem. It must be something psychological. Eventually, I just felt so bad about all this, and every time I was with my girlfriend, it was all I could think about, that it sapped all the joy out of that relationship. And I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. I didn't want to feel those horrible feelings. So I ended the relationship. I broke up with her. And we never really talked about what was going on because I didn't know what was going on. At college, I was using pornography less. I had a roommate, I was busy with classes, and busy building a life there. But over time, I did start to bring it back into my life, sneaking moments when I was alone in the room to use pornography, and it was still a regular part of my life throughout my college experience. I had several other girlfriends during that time. They were all short-term, and I encountered the same problem over and over again in those relationships. And it was a pattern that would repeat We would start off really interested in each other, very attracted to each other. And when it got to that point where, she expected that we would start having sex, and I wanted that too, mentally, we would always encounter the same problem. I would never be able to talk about it or understand what was going on. I still thought at the time that I just needed to become more comfortable and get more experience being with someone else rather than just by myself while reaching orgasm. But nothing ever worked. All throughout college, I never was able to have successful sex once, and still considered myself a virgin, even though I'd been with quite a few women by that point and had many opportunities to have sex, but just was physically incapable of doing it. After college, I felt hopeless. I felt like I didn't have any answers, and that I was so tired of encountering failure over and over again and seeing these relationships crumble, relationships with women that I was really attracted to and admired and thought were beautiful people. And I was losing them left and right because of this. And so I decided just not to try anymore, not to date, try to focus on the rest of my life, on building myself up. And if I couldn't have sex, if I couldn't be romantic or have a real relationship, I could work on other aspects of my life. So I did for a couple of years. After I graduated in 2012 to late 2014, I didn't date anybody. And at late 2014, I started to feel better about myself. I started to feel like I was an adult, I was a man, and I was doing this thing called life. I was feeling more confident, I was feeling more capable, and I realized that this is the time that I have to face this demon again. I have to find out what's really going on, because I want a real relationship. I want children in the future. I want to have a satisfying sexual life. And I need to find out what's going on and fix it once and for all. So for the first time, I think in years, I searched for answers to my problem again. I searched online, and this time I found much, much more than I had first found when I searched in 2008. I found thousands of other guys, my age or younger or older, coming out and talking about their inability to have sex, either for the first time or in their relationships, that they had lost the ability to perform and to experience satisfying sex. And they all had one thing in common, which is years of internet porn use. Over time, using internet porn had desensitized them to sexual stimuli and had conditioned their sexuality to respond to a computer screen rather than to a real-life person in front of them who wanted them. And they decided to quit. They quit using pornography and tried to recover. And they were pioneers. They didn't have anyone to guide them. They didn't see anything in medical journals or doctors telling them that if they quit porn, everything would be okay. They just realized that if they were ever going to have their ability to have sex again, that they had to quit and they had to forge off into the unknown. And they found that they were able to recover, whether it took a couple of months or even up to a year or more. Their brains were able to readjust and come back to a new normal, and they became healthy again, sexually healthy, and back to how they should be. And then I saw the TED Talk by Gary Wilson, The Great Porn Experiment. And this is really the moment that changed my life, because he, in this TED Talk, goes over the phenomenon of internet porn and how it provides a level of sexual stimulation that is unmatched in the natural world. That our brains interpret what we're seeing on the screen, dozens of attractive mates all seeming to want us sexually, as real, and that our brains respond in kind to that stimulation, even though rationally we know that it's not real, that it's just images on a screen, that they're phantoms, that it's a fantasy. The part of our brain that processes reward stimuli, that makes us feel cravings when we see a fat slice of chocolate cake or a burger, and makes us want to eat that, or makes us feel aroused when we see an attractive potential partner, that part of our brains was activated to supernormal degrees by internet pornography, an unlimited source of unlimited variety of free content that we could access at any time. And over years of using this, it can actually numb that part of ourselves that responds to sexual stimuli and overload our brain with dopamine, that neurochemical that inspires us to want, that makes us desire things. And that our brain downregulates the receptors for that dopamine in order to protect itself from overstimulation. But over time, the brain can heal, he said. The brain is plastic throughout our lives. It can change depending on what we do, how we interact with the world. Studies have shown that over time, practicing juggling every day, the parts of our brain that process motion and physical and visual acuity actually grow in size, and that after ceasing to practice juggling, it returns to their old size. Similar changes happen in the brain when we engage in something like chronic internet porn use. But over time, if we quit using the pornography, our brains can return to a balance and can become more sensitive, and we can recondition our sexuality, recondition ourselves to respond to real physical contact with someone we're attracted to in the real world. After reading this and seeing this, I finally saw light at the end of the tunnel. I just felt I finally wasn't alone anymore. Other people had been through this. Other people had recovered and seen the other side. And now I had a path to do the same. And that felt amazing at the time. It felt like a huge weight was falling off my shoulders. I finally had a way out, and I could fix this. I had something concrete to grasp onto. I could quit using pornography, and I could live the life that I'd wanted for so long. And that was it for me. I committed right then and there to never use porn again. After seeing and hearing my own pain and struggles echoed in the experiences of others, it was so clear to me just how damaging porn had been to my life, and how I'd been fooling myself for years, thinking that it wasn't, or trying to rationalize that it wasn't, in order to allow myself to continue using. Because at the time when I was using it, it felt good. It was something that I relied on, to feel good when I didn't feel good, to forget about my problems, to forget about my issues. When I was using porn, I could always just lose myself and let all of my worries slide away. Of course, after I was done, they'd all come slamming back, bigger and more terrifying than ever. But the temptation to use in order to forget was always there. And the availability was always there as well. Now, many other guys whose stories I'd been reading said that they were able to heal themselves within 90 days, but there were others who were able to do it much faster, and still others who took much, much longer. 9 months, a year, 2 years. But I knew, no matter how long it took, I was committed. I was on this journey to the end. I was going to get my life back and my sexuality back. I was going to be able to have the kind of satisfying romantic relationship that I'd always dreamed of. So I started my journey, and I started logging in a journal how that journey was going each and every day. The realizations I was having about myself, if I had any cravings to use. And at the beginning, my life felt so much better. I just felt so energized every day and so hopeful. I think because I finally saw that there was a way out for me. I had light at the end of the tunnel. I had hope. And I was caught up on that charge. And so staying away from porn, especially in the beginning, was easy for me. I was, at the time, dating a new woman. And I think when I've told this story in the past, I said that I met her shortly after learning all of this about myself and starting this journey. But the truth is that I actually became aware of her and we started talking just before. And it was talking with her in part and seeing and recognizing how special she could be in my life that inspired me to face this problem and conquer it once and for all. And I think I actually saw Gary Wilson's TED Talk after meeting her and talking with her. But that relationship was just budding. We had gone on, I think, just one or two real dates before we met at a park to go for a run. And at that time, I realized I had to tell her about all this. So I told her that I had recently discovered something about myself, a problem that I'd had for a long time, and that she had met me at a strange time in my life. I asked her, so you know how most young guys use pornography, right? And they masturbate to pornography. And she said, yeah. And I said that I had used it as well from a young age. I first saw it when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and it became a regular part of my life for the years after that. And I always thought it was normal and harmless until recently, when I realized that it had actually warped my sexuality and my emotionality and how I could connect with real partners. And it made it impossible for me to have a satisfying sexual relationship. But that I had seen that there was a way out of this, and that pornography was in fact the cause of all these problems. And I was on a journey to quit pornography and recover, but that it might be a while before I was able to be a full sexual partner for her. I didn't really know what to expect. She was the first person I'd told about all this in my life. I think I had shared part of my story at least anonymously online, but no one I knew, and she was the first. So I wasn't sure how she would react. I just knew that it was going to be better to lay it out there for her and be honest, be truthful. And she reacted really well. She understood. We read some of Your Brain on Porn together. I think I sent her Gary Wilson's TED Talk. And she was very supportive. She was wonderful. She admired my courage in opening myself up, being vulnerable, allowing her to see inside the parts of myself that I was ashamed of and that I felt that made me feel weak. And she respected that. And she said it was perfectly fine if it was going to take time, because she didn't want to jump into anything either, that she had never had sex before, and so she didn't want to rush into anything. Wanted to allow that time for feelings to develop and see if we were really right for each other. So at the time, I thought, yes, we're perfect for each other. This is great. And it was great. We got to know each other better and better and started falling for each other. And it was during this time that I realized pornography had impacted me in far more ways than just taking away my ability to have sex. As Gary Wilson put it in that TED Talk, that desensitization of the reward center of the brain affects not only our response to sexual stimuli, but our response to everything in life. Everything becomes less stimulating, less potent, less exciting. And I could see the color start to come back into my life, where before I was bored more of the time. I was less interested in my work or in my friendships or in my family. I was always caught up in fantasy or in imagining the future and how things would be better in the future, and not just enjoying the present moment. Instead, I came to be more appreciative of my day-to-day life. I was more interested in the people around me. I took great joy in just having a good conversation. I was able to be much more present and focused with the people I was with. I remember riding in a car with my family, and there was a radio story on, and it was a story about a murder that had been committed. And I just felt the reality of that in a way that I hadn't in a long time. It's easy to get callous and desensitized to that sort of thing because we're surrounded by it. The media always reports horrible events around the world, and we're watching violent movies, we're playing violent video games. We're desensitized to the potency of situations like that. But in that moment, I felt it. I felt so much sadness and compassion for the victim of that crime that I just started crying in the back seat, and I had to put my head against the window and turn away from everybody so no one would notice. And at that moment, I realized how long it had been since I really cried. Since about age 10 to age 22, I didn't cry a single time. And I think a large part of that is because I was numb and desensitized by my use of porn. I did cry a couple of times before quitting porn as an adult, and those were extraordinary circumstances in my life that broke through that desensitization and really hit me. but I could feel myself becoming more open, like my calluses were falling off, and I was more sensitive to the world and more in tune with people around me. And that can be painful sometimes, to be sure. Being numb is comfortable. Nothing hurts as bad as it otherwise does, but the joy is also muted. So I was glad to get these emotions back. I was glad to be able to cry, because I could also feel greater joy and greater connection with the people around me. And I realized I had never really been in love before, because what I was feeling with the woman I was with at that time was more powerful than anything I had felt before. I had told my first girlfriend in high school that I loved her, because I thought that I did. But I wasn't really sure. It didn't just come out of me. It didn't just bubble out of me in a natural way. I said it because I thought I was supposed to say it, because I thought this is what love feels like. But ever after that, I never said it to another woman, because I didn't want to say it if it wasn't true. And I wanted to be absolutely sure that it was true before I said it to anybody. And I said it to that woman I was with after quitting porn, because I felt it. I felt it so concretely, so completely, that there was no doubt in my mind it was true. And that was a beautiful thing. And during this time, I was logging my libido and my sex drive and trying to figure out, is there any changes happening? Am I recovering? And I did start to notice, after a few weeks, a month or two, that I was more responsive and more sensitive when I was with her. And it was day 72, I believe, that I was actually able to have successful sex with her for the first time. And it wasn't perfect. Not everything went extraordinarily well. It still felt somewhat alien, but we muddled our way through it, and it worked well enough for me to know that pornography really was the source of all of my issues surrounding relationships and sex, and enough to tell me that I was on the right path and things were going to keep getting better. And they did. At first, it was the porn-induced erectile dysfunction that faded away, but I still had a great deal of difficulty reaching climax during sex for quite a while, and that's called porn-induced delayed ejaculation. But over time, I started to regain my sensitivity as well, and that also faded into the background, and I could feel myself coming back to a healthy balance, a new normal. And that was wonderful. At this time, I had decided this journey was powerful enough and life-changing enough that I had to share it. I'd always had aspirations to be an author, to write, and this wasn't the first book that I thought I would be writing. I thought I would be writing fiction, science fiction or fantasy or something like that, crime drama, but instead it was Whack, Addicted to Internet Porn, a nonfiction book about my own struggles with pornography, other people's struggles, other people's recoveries, a guide to recovery, and an examination of how internet porn has affected our society. Because it really is a new phenomenon. Pornography in some form or another has been around for thousands of years. Drawings on cave walls, erotic stories, artistic pictures, erotic paintings, movies in the theater, VHS tapes, magazines. But all of that pales in comparison with what is available on the internet. What the internet provides is unlimited, instant access to an unlimited variety of content. We can go online now with a broadband internet connection, open up 20 tabs, have compilation videos playing in every tab, see dozens or hundreds of attractive mates performing a lifetime's variety of sex acts in 30 minutes. And that's far more stimulation that our brains evolved to handle. So I decided I needed to share all this information that I had learned. I didn't want other people out there like me, lost for years, not knowing what was wrong with them, feeling broken, having no help, no guidance, no way out. So I just wrote the book that I figured I really could have needed when I was 17 or 18 years old. I wrote that book, and by the time I was ready to publish it, about 5 or 6 months after I started that journey, other things in my life had changed. That relationship that I was in ended suddenly and unexpectedly. She broke up with me. And for a long time, I didn't really know why. But looking back, knowing what I know now, being more experienced in relationships and having done self-reflection, I do know why. It was because, well, for one thing, I wasn't very experienced in relationships. I didn't understand how to protect them and foster them and appreciate the love that you share with another person in a way that allows it to grow and keeps it safe. I was focused more on myself and writing my book and sharing this story with other people that I neglected her, and I didn't appreciate the love she had for me nearly enough. And she broke up with me over the phone, said she couldn't imagine marrying me. And that was hard. That was tough. And I think the last journal entry that I put in the book is a journal entry describing that breakup and how I knew that pain could be a trigger for using pornography. That once we start to use a substance or a behavior to salve those wounds, to make us feel better in dark times, that any sort of stress or pain, loneliness can become a trigger for cravings. But I committed that that wouldn't be me, that I wouldn't allow that to happen. And I ended it on a hopeful note that I had learned a lot from that relationship, and no matter how painful the ending, I was very glad that it happened and a better person because of her, because of what we had together. And that was true. That was true. So I published the book. I started making YouTube videos as well, sharing information about porn-induced erectile dysfunction, porn addiction. And then I went off to work my summer job. So I was away for about 3 months fighting wildfires, which I've done for 6 or 7 years now in the summer times. And when I got back, that's when things started to slide downhill. Yeah, that's when there was a crack in my armor. I was feeling sort of lost, without the purpose of having a book to write and finish, lonely because my relationship had ended, and I started using the screen for erotic stimulation again. And at first it wasn't pornography, it was just pictures or videos of attractive women. But I was kidding myself, because our brains don't know the difference between pornography or erotic photographs. All our brains know is that this is something arousing that is turning us on. And I was activating all of those same pathways and same patterns that I had worked so hard to erase from my brain and to heal from. And eventually, it got to the point where I ended up relapsing completely and going back and using pornography again. I remember it very clearly. I was sitting in my room, and that notion of using porn again came into my mind. And it was like a door was open. And once that door was open, I couldn't close it again. I just remember pacing back and forth for about a half an hour, fighting with myself on whether or not I was going to pull up that screen and search for pornography again. And I was shaking the whole time. I felt like an addict who was jonesing for a fix. And yeah, I was erect for a half an hour or two, just pacing. I don't mean to get too graphic here, but I'm just trying to tell the truth and be clear that it really did feel like I was jonesing for a hit of heroin or something. It was crazy. And yeah, I ended up sitting down that night and using pornography 3 times. And it wasn't that I was telling myself I was going back to porn or anything. It was a moment of weakness. It wasn't something that I wanted to continue. But that started off about a year period in which I was going back and forth between streaks of being porn-free, and then in moments of weakness or in pain, or just falling back into old patterns of behavior, I would use porn again. And I was hating myself for it, because I was supposed to be this porn addiction expert who was helping teach others about the dangers of porn, and here I was, still not completely out of the mire myself. But during that time, I did have a couple more short-term sexual relationships, and it wasn't that I completely erased all my progress away from PIED. After using porn for that first time, I did actually fall into a flatline. We call a flatline when we experience just a complete lack of libido. It feels like we're no longer sexual beings. And it can also be accompanied by anxiety and depression, other emotional symptoms like that. And it's something that people recovering from a porn addiction often experience for a couple of weeks at a time or several months at a time. For me, it lasted about a month. And after I came out of that, I felt, much better. And I was able to have sex with my girlfriend at that time. And it actually felt much better than it ever had before. But that relationship ended too. And so did the next one. And in times of being single, I would give in to the temptation to use porn off and on. And I might have a streak of several weeks or several months, but then I would go back and use it again. And it was a period in which I was fighting with myself a lot. And I was struggling with a lot of self-loathing. And I had to relearn a lot of what I had already learned about leaving behind an addiction. And that was when I truly realized how addicted I actually was. The short definition of addiction for me is you're engaging in a behavior or using a substance that you've realized causes you harm, and you've committed to not use that anymore, to live a better life. But you find it very difficult or impossible to do so, and you keep breaking promises to yourself. And I was breaking promises to myself left and right. And during that year, I learned a lot about myself and a lot about addiction. What addiction really is, how powerful and devastating it can be. When you go against every value you hold, when you break every most earnest promise to yourself, all for a few moments of pleasure that you immediately regret, and you can't seem to stop doing that, you feel powerless. You feel hopeless. I lost a lot of that hope that I had in the beginning. Hope that I could live a porn-free life. And I had to learn all over again what I really needed in order to stay clean, to stay off of porn, and to say yes to life, just as I said no to porn. I had to remember always that I was a porn addict. And I think I'll be a porn addict for life. I don't think that's something that you get rid of entirely. Now, that doesn't mean that my addiction controls me or it makes me live a lesser life or that I have to fight compulsions every day. That's not what it means. What it means is that the wiring is there. After a long time away from porn, it's dormant. And if I stay vigilant and stay aware of the pitfalls and the paths that lead back down that slippery slope, then I can live a great life. But I can't just forget that I'm an addict. I can't not worry completely about urges, because I have to know what to do when those temptations come up, because I think that they always will. That's okay. I think in the end it makes me a stronger person. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? It's pithy, but it's true, at least in this case. So I learned that I need daily disciplines. I need to remember every day the path that I'm on, what's truly important, and what to watch out for. Because if I don't, if I forget, if I get lazy, if I get complacent, I'll fall right back into that rut, and that rut leads me back to relapse. So every day, I have a page that I follow. I print it out the night before. It's a little note to myself, reminds me of what's important, what to focus on, and it includes little daily disciplines that I have myself do every single day that keep me feeling productive and proud and happy. These are things like get up and make my bed before a certain time, exercise, meditate, connect with people, make sure that my daily page is made before the end of the day for the next day, and also a to-do list of things to do for that day. So I have structure. I have a roadmap. I'm not just lost in blank time, because that formless time is a pitfall that a lot of addicts fall into. And as long as I hold on to that daily discipline of using that daily page and giving myself a path to follow, I can live the life that I truly want to live. It's not something that's restrictive. It's not something that I have to do. It's something that I want to do. And it's just a reminder and a structure that allows me to live the life that I want to lead. And there are a lot more things that I learned than just that. But over that year, experimenting and failing and having success again and again and again, I ended up learning what I needed to stay clean. And I felt more and more confident in my sobriety and in my porn-free life, to the point where I decided to start coaching people personally who were struggling with these same issues. Perhaps addiction, perhaps porn-induced sexual dysfunction. They don't always go hand in hand. Perhaps other porn-related problems that people were trying to recover from. I wanted to offer not only general information like in my book or my videos, but personal guidance for people. So I started offering my services through email or Skype or phone for anybody who wanted to talk to someone who had been there, who had been through it, and get guidance on the path that they were on. And that has been incredibly fulfilling. Working with people, hearing their stories. Often these people come to me devastated or lonely, or having never told anyone else about these issues that they're struggling with at all. And I get to be the one that listens, that hears their truth, that accepts them, and that gives them the answers that they need to feel like they have a way out, they have a way forward, they're not alone, and there is definitely hope that they can recover from whatever issues they are facing. And I get to see that happen, and that's a wonderful privilege that I'm grateful for to this day. Now, life isn't easy now. It's certainly better. I can't think of a single aspect of my life that isn't better now that I am porn-free and I've left that behind. But that doesn't mean it's easy. In fact, it's harder sometimes because I don't have that crutch to rely on anymore. When problems crop up in my life, I face them. And that can be difficult, that can be uncomfortable and challenging and painful, but in the end, it feels much better to face them and to get past them and to grow from that experience than it does just to avoid them. I can say that before, when I was using porn, my average day was a 4 or a 5 out of 10. And now my average day is a 7 or an 8. And all of life is more vibrant for me now that I'm off of porn. One thing I hear very often from clients, and something that I've felt in my own life, is about regret. It's about feeling like they've wasted years of their lives. They've missed out on experiences and relationships and opportunities due to their porn use, and they have trouble forgiving themselves for that. They have trouble getting over that and living in the present, focusing on the present and the future. But what I say is that those experiences are not wastes. No, I don't have any cherished memories of using pornography. It never added to my life happiness. I'm not going to, on my deathbed, look back and be glad I had those experiences of watching porn. But going through that, struggling to be free of it, and seeing how much better life could be off of porn has helped me become a stronger person. And it's helped me appreciate what I have, the people in my life, much more than I would have otherwise, I do believe. And that's how you should look at it. If you're out there having those same thoughts, none of that is wasted. And everything can have a purpose that happens in our lives if we learn from it. And if we move forward smarter, better, stronger people. Who knows, if you hadn't gotten caught up in pornography and had to learn about addiction and willpower and self-discipline and becoming free of it, maybe you would have become a heroin addict instead and died. So look on the bright side. Thank you, listener, for sitting with me and listening to my story. I apologize if I meandered or wandered too much. I hope that it was insightful for you. It was the first time I've really tried to tell that story in several years. And it was very interesting going back through those memories. Maybe you understand yourself a little bit better now. Maybe you understand a loved one a little bit better. I do hope that you understand the potential for internet porn's negative impacts on people's lives. And I'm not saying that everyone who uses it or everyone who is exposed to it is going to have the same experiences that I did. I believe that in many ways it's like other recreational substances or activities. I can drink socially on occasion just fine. I never get too drunk. I never do anything I regret. And I never get sick. It doesn't really have negative impacts on my life. But other people, if they use alcohol, they go out of control and it can ruin their lives. It can end in their deaths. The same is true in many ways for pornography. And we need to be aware of those dangers. We need to be having an open conversation about this. That was one of my chief goals when I started this journey, is to open up that conversation, get people thinking about it and talking about it. We can't just especially let our children figure it out for themselves, because they're not going to be figuring out sex and love and relationships for themselves. They're going to be learning from their peers, one, and two, from the internet and from online pornography. And we can't let the pornographers teach our children about sex. If you think your child is too young to be talking about these topics with, keep in mind that when I was 5 years old, I thought I was ready to have sex. And at 9, I started using internet porn. And I'm not too far of an outlier there. The average age of first exposure to porn is 11 years old. I think in the end, it's about addressing what we actually want and what we actually need. Most young people don't actually want pornography. What they want is intimacy and connection with other people. And if we teach them how to find that in healthy ways, and how pornography can sabotage our ability to do so, then we're giving our young people a much better chance to live happy, healthy lives than they otherwise would have. All right, I think that's a great ending point. Thank you again for sticking with me and listening today. I really appreciate each one of you listeners. If this podcast has had a positive impact on your life, and you think that this information is important, I'd like to invite you at this time to join the Love People Use Things campaign by supporting us on Patreon. Now, Patreon is a platform that allows anybody to support the creators that they really think are doing good work. And you can pledge as little as $1 a month, but we have different reward tiers. And for example, if you support us at $10 a month, we will send you Matt Fradd's book, The Porn Myth, Exposing the Reality Behind the Fantasy of Pornography. Another book by Amanda Zerfas called Equipped, Smart Parenting in a Sexualized World. 1 month of Covenant Eyes accountability software for free, the best accountability and internet filtering software that I have found. And a 3x3 Love People Use Things sticker, 25% off a Love People Use Things tee, and access to free live stream events for men, for women, for both men and women, and for parents. To support us, you can just go to lovepeopleusethings.fm and click support. For each one of you who are already a Patreon member and a patron to this show, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Each one of you with those pledges tells us that we are making a difference and that this is a worthy cause and we should keep doing it, keep putting out this content. All right, everybody. I hope you have a love-filled and porn-free day. This has been Noah Church speaking to you from Portland, Oregon, and you'll hear me again soon.